The forest was a cathedral of silence. Raven moved through it like a prayer, sharp, deliberate, unbroken. Her breath was steady, her blades gleamed in the pale morning light, and her eyes held the kind of focus that came from years of repetition. She wasn't just training, she was becoming. Around her, the clan moved in rhythm. No one spoke. Words were wasted breath. Their language was motion, strikes, feints, pivots. The code was written in bruises and blood. She lunged at the effigy, her daggers slicing through the throat, then the heart, then the base of the skull. The kill pattern, the sacred sequence. Again, again, until her arms trembled and her knuckles split. "Faster!" Elder Kale growled from the shadows. Raven didn't flinch. She adjusted her stance, wiped the blood from her hand, and began again. This was her life. Discipline, obedience, the hunt. Her clan had no name spoken beyond their borders. They were myth to outsiders, ghosts. But within the forest, they were law. Their purpose was singular: eliminate the werewolf threat. No questions, no mercy. Raven had never seen one up close, but she knew their anatomy better than her own. She could recite the pressure points that dropped them in seconds. She'd memorized the sound of their growl from recordings. Low, primal, wrong. She believed what she was taught. She had to. Later, by the fire, the elders recited the creed. Their voices rose in unison, low and rhythmic, like a heartbeat shared across generations. Blood for blood, moon for moon. The hunt is sacred. The hunt is truth. Raven repeated the words, her voice steady, her eyes fixed on the flames. But something flickered beneath the surface, a thought, a fracture. She remembered the dream from the night before, vague, unsettling, a pair of eyes in the dark, not glowing, not monstrous, just sad. She hadn't told anyone. Dreams were weakness, and weakness was punished. Elder Kale approached, his cloak trailing ash and silence. "You're ready," he said. Raven nodded. "Tomorrow, you enter rogue territory. Alone." Her pulse quickened, not with fear, with anticipation. This was her proving ground, her rite of passage. She would return with a kill. Or not at all. That night, she sharpened her blades until her fingers bled. She packed light, tools, maps, a single vial of wolfsbane. Her cloak bore the mark of her lineage, a crescent moon split by a dagger. She stared at it for a long time. Outside, the wind howled through the trees like a warning. Raven didn't sleep. She was the hunter. And tomorrow, she would face the myth.
Dawn broke like a blade across the horizon. Raven stood at the edge of the forest, her cloak heavy with dew, her breath curling into the cold morning air. Behind her, the clan watched in silence. No cheers, no farewells. This wasn't a celebration. It was a test. Elder Kale approached, his eyes sharp beneath the hood. "You know the code," he said. Raven nodded. Blood for blood, moon for moon. Kale handed her a small satchel, wolfsbane, iron darts, a map etched in charcoal. No compass, no guide. "You'll find them near the river bend. Rogues, wild, unclaimed." Raven didn't flinch. "And if I don't?" Kale's voice was stone. "Then you weren't ready." She turned without another word. The forest swallowed her whole. The trees grew denser with every step. Light fractured through the canopy, casting long shadows that danced across the moss. Raven moved like she'd been taught, silent, deliberate, eyes scanning for movement. Her blades were strapped tight to her thighs, her senses tuned to every rustle, every shift in the wind. But something felt off. The forest here was older, wilder. It didn't hum with life, it watched. The birds were quiet. The air was thick. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Raven paused at a clearing, crouched low and steadied the ground. Tracks. Deep, clawed, fresh. She followed them east, toward the river bend. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but anticipation. This was what she'd trained for. The hunt, the kill, the proof. But beneath that certainty, something stirred. A memory. A dream. Eyes in the dark. Not glowing, not monstrous. Just human. She shook it off. Hours passed. The sun climbed, then dipped. Raven moved like a shadow, her body aching, her mind sharp. She found signs, broken branches, torn bark, the scent of fur and blood. She was close. At dusk, she reached the river bend. The water was slow, dark, reflecting the sky like glass. She crouched behind a fallen log, scanning the opposite bank. Nothing. Then movement. A flicker in the trees. A shape. Tall. Fast. Raven's breath caught. Her fingers curled around her blade. This was it. She rose slowly, heart pounding, muscles coiled. But the forest held its breath, and somewhere deep inside her, a question whispered. What if they're not what I was told? She buried it. She was a hunter, and the hunt had begun.
The forest had teeth. Raven felt it in the way the wind shifted, no longer crisp but sharp. The trees leaned closer, their branches tangled like claws. She moved through the underbrush with practiced silence, her cloak brushing against damp leaves, her senses tuned to every sound. She was deep in rogue territory now, alone, just as the elders had commanded. Her fingers hovered near her blade. The silence was too perfect. No birds, no rustling, just the sound of her own breath, steady and stubborn. Then, movement. A flicker in the corner of her eye. She turned, blade drawn, heart pounding. The first rogue struck from above. Raven rolled, narrowly avoiding the claws that sliced through the air. She came up fast, slashing across the creature's chest. It howled, staggered, but didn't fall. Two more emerged from the trees, eyes glowing, teeth bared. She backed into a defensive stance, calculating angles, escape routes. But they were fast, wild, not like the ones she'd studied. These wolves didn't follow patterns. They hunted like chaos. One lunged. She ducked, drove her dagger into its side. It screamed but didn't drop. The second tackled her from behind. They crashed to the ground, her blade skittering out of reach. Claws tore at her cloak. Teeth snapped inches from her throat. She fought back with fists, elbows, anything she could reach. Her leg twisted beneath her. Pain flared. She was losing. She reached for her hidden blade, but her fingers were slick with blood. The rogue pinned her down, snarling, breath hot against her face. This was it. Then, a roar. Not hers, not theirs. A blur of motion. A figure slammed into the rogue, sending it flying. Raven gasped, dragging herself upright, blood dripping from her thigh. He stood between her and the wolves. Tall, broad, eyes burning like embers. A werewolf, but not like the others. He moved with precision, striking fast, clean. One rogue fell, another fled. The third didn't rise. Raven stared, breath ragged, blade forgotten. The figure turned. His face was human, mostly, his expression unreadable. "You're hurt," he said. She tried to stand, but her leg buckled. She collapsed, cursing under her breath.
I don't need your help, she spat. He didn't move. You'll bleed out if I leave you. She hated that he was right. Her vision blurred, the forest tilted, her body felt heavy, distant. He stepped closer, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. I'm not your enemy, he said. Raven's fingers reached for her dagger, but her strength was gone. The last thing she saw was his hand reaching for her, not to strike, but to lift. Then, darkness. And in that darkness, a single thought echoed. He saved me.
Darkness came in waves. Raven drifted in and out of it, her body heavy, her thoughts scattered like leaves in wind. Pain pulsed through her leg, sharp and rhythmic. Her fingers twitched, reaching for a blade that wasn't there. She was moving, not walking, not crawling, carried. She opened her eyes briefly, just enough to see the outline of a figure. Broad shoulders, a cloak torn at the edges, the scent of pine and ash. Not human, not one of hers. A werewolf. Her breath caught. She tried to speak, to fight, but her voice was buried beneath blood and exhaustion. The figure didn't speak. He moved through the forest with quiet urgency, his steps careful, his grip firm but not cruel. Raven's head lolled against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady, strong, not the erratic thrum of a predator, something else. They reached a cabin tucked between the trees, half swallowed by moss and shadow. He kicked the door open gently, carried her inside, and laid her on a bed of furs. The fire was already lit. The room smelled of cedar and smoke. Raven tried to rise. Her body refused. The figure knelt beside her, pulling back the torn fabric around her wound. She flinched, but he didn't react. He cleaned the blood, stitched the gash with practiced hands, and wrapped it tight. She watched through half-lidded eyes, confusion blooming like frost. Why wasn't he killing her? Why wasn't she dead? He moved with purpose, not rage. His face was calm, his eyes unreadable. Not glowing, not monstrous, just tired. When he finished, he sat by the fire, his back to her, and spoke without turning. "You'll live." Raven's voice was barely a whisper. "Why?" He didn't answer. She tried again. "You're a wolf." He nodded. "And you're a hunter." Silence stretched between them, thick and strange. "You should have let me die." He turned then, slowly, his gaze meeting hers. "I've seen enough death. I don't need more." Raven didn't know what to say. Her training had no script for this, no protocol for kindness, no warning for mercy. She lay back, the firelight flickering across the ceiling, her thoughts unraveling. This wasn't how it was supposed to go.
The world narrowed to pain. Raven's leg throbbed with every heartbeat, her vision swimming in shades of red and shadow. She clung to consciousness like a blade slipping through her fingers. The forest blurred around her, trees bending, light flickering, the scent of blood thick in her lungs. She tried to crawl. Her fingers dug into the earth, nails scraping moss and stone. Her blade was gone, her strength scattered. The rogues had vanished, but the damage remained, deep, pulsing, unforgiving. She collapsed against a fallen tree, her breath shallow, her body trembling. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. She was a hunter, trained, prepared. She'd memorized every tactic, every escape route. But the forest didn't care. It swallowed her whole, indifferent to her creed, her blood oath, her pride. The wind shifted. Footsteps. She turned her head, slowly, painfully.
A figure approached, tall, cloaked, silent. Not a rogue, not a clan member. The werewolf. Ash. He knelt beside her, his face unreadable, his movements careful, not threatening, not kind, just present. "You're fading," he said. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry, her voice buried beneath exhaustion. Ash reached into his satchel, pulled out a flask, and held it to her lips. She hesitated, then drank. The liquid was bitter, herbal, warm. Her body shuddered. "You need rest," he said. She wanted to argue, to fight, to demand answers, but her limbs betrayed her. Her thoughts unraveled. Ash lifted her gently, cradling her like something fragile. She hated the feeling, hated the weakness, hated the quiet comfort of his arms. The forest watched in silence as he carried her through the trees. The cabin appeared like a ghost, wooden, weathered, half swallowed by ivy. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, laid her on a bed of furs, and stoked the fire. Raven's eyes fluttered. She saw the carved wolf on the shelf, the photograph, the pendant. She saw him, not the monster she'd been taught to fear, just a man. Her breath slowed, her body sank, and then darkness.
The first thing she felt was warmth. Not the heat of battle, but something softer, steady, flickering. Firelight. Raven's eyes opened slowly, her vision swimming in amber and shadow. The ceiling above her was wood, rough and aged, beams darkened by time. She wasn't in the forest anymore. She tried to sit up. Pain flared in her thigh, sharp and immediate. Her breath caught. Her hand reached instinctively for her blade. Gone. She scanned the room. A cabin, small, quiet. Her gear was stacked neatly on the chair, her weapons cleaned, arranged. Nothing stolen, nothing broken. She was alive, and she wasn't alone. A figure moved near the hearth, stirring something in a pot. Broad shoulders, quiet steps. Ash, the werewolf. Raven's pulse quickened. Her gritted her teeth and pushed herself upright, ignoring the pain. Her eyes locked onto him. "You should have killed me," she said. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "You're welcome." She hated the calm in his voice, the lack of threat. It made everything more complicated. "What is this? A trap?" "No. A cabin." She glared. "Don't be clever." Ash stepped back, hands raised. "You were bleeding out. I stopped it, that's all." Raven didn't believe him. Not yet. But her body betrayed her. Weak, aching, grateful. She looked down at the bandages on her leg. Clean, precise, not the work of a monster. "You're not like the others," she said. Ash didn't answer. He returned to the fire, ladled soup into a bowl, and placed it gently on the table beside her. "I don't expect you to trust me, but you need to eat." Raven stared at the bowl. Her stomach growled. She hated that. She picked it up, tasted it. It was simple, warm, human. Ash sat across the room, watching the flames. Not her. Raven studied him. His posture was relaxed but guarded. His eyes, when they met hers, held something unexpected. Sadness. She looked around the cabin. It was sparse but lived in. A carved wooden wolf sat on the shelf, a faded photograph tucked into the corner of the mirror. A woman, human. Her breath caught. "You loved her," she said. Ash didn't deny it. "She was a hunter, like you." Raven felt the weight of those words. The tension between them shifted. Less threat, more question. She finished the soup, set the bowl down, and leaned back against the pillows. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. Inside, the silence stretched. Raven didn't know what this was. A trap, a test, a mistake. But she knew one thing. Ash had saved her, and that changed everything.
The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Raven lay still, her body aching, her leg wrapped in fresh bandages. The pain was manageable now, dull, rhythmic, like a distant drum. But her thoughts were sharp, unforgiving. Ash moved quietly, placing a steaming mug on the table beside her. He didn't speak, didn't hover, just waited. Raven eyed the mug, then him. "What is it?" she asked. "Tea," he said, "for the pain." She didn't reach for it. Ash sat across the room, his posture relaxed, but alert. He didn't look like a monster. He didn't look like anything she'd been trained to expect. "You could have left me," she said. "I didn't." "Why?" Ash didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. "Because I know what it's like to be hunted. And I know what it's like to be alone." Raven's fingers curled around the blanket. She hated the way his words settled in her chest. Quiet, heavy. True. "I'm not your ally." "I know. I'm trained to kill you." "I know that too." Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. Raven reached for the mug, hesitated, then drank. It was bitter, earthy, warm. Her body relaxed slightly, despite her mind's protest. Ash stood and moved to the window, looking out into the trees. They won't stay away for long, the rogues. They're restless, hungry. Raven's voice was low. "Why aren't you one of them?" Ash turned, his eyes catching the firelight. "Because I chose something different once." She didn't ask what, not yet. He walked to the shelf, picked up a small wooden carving, a wolf curled around a crescent moon, and placed it gently on the table beside her. "He made this years ago." Raven studied it. The detail was delicate, protective, not violent. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. Ash gave a faint smile. "Neither are you." She looked away, unsure of what that meant. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. Inside, the fire burned steady. Raven shifted beneath the blanket, her body slowly surrendering to rest. Ash moved toward the door. "I'll keep watch," he said. Raven's voice stopped him. "Why are you helping me?" He paused, hand on the latch. "Because someone once helped me, and I didn't deserve it either." Then he stepped outside, leaving her with the fire, the carving, and the quiet truth that her world was beginning to change.
The cabin was quiet, but not peaceful. Raven lay still, her leg pulsing with dull pain beneath the bandages. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. Ash moved through the space like a ghost, silent, deliberate, always just out of reach. He didn't speak unless necessary. He didn't ask questions. He didn't explain. And that unsettled her more than anything. She watched him from beneath half-lowered lashes. Every movement was careful, controlled. He chopped wood with precision, stirred the fire with practiced ease, cleaned his tools like a ritual. Not the wildness she'd been taught to expect, not the chaos. Just quiet. Too quiet. "You live out here alone?" she asked finally, her voice rough from disuse. Ash didn't look up. "Yes." "For how long?" "A while." She frowned. "You're not very talkative." He glanced at her then, just briefly. "Most hunters don't ask questions. They shoot first." Raven didn't respond. Because he was right. That's what she'd been taught.
that hesitation was weakness, that mercy was betrayal. But she hadn't killed him, and he hadn't killed her. That truth hung between them like smoke. She shifted, wincing as pain flared in her leg. Ash moved toward her, kneeling beside the bed. His hands hovered, unsure. "Let me check the stitches." Raven hesitated, then nodded. His fingers were warm, gentle. Not what she expected. Not what she'd been told.
Morning crept in slowly, bleeding through the cabin window in pale streaks of gold. Raven stirred beneath the blanket, her legs stiff but healing. The silence was different now, less threatening, more contemplative. Ash was gone. She sat up, chesting her weight. Pain flared, but it was manageable. Her fingers brushed the edge of the bed frame, carved with symbols, wolves, moons, and something older, something sacred. Curiosity tugged at her. Raven rose, limping slightly, and began to explore. The cabin was small but layered with stories, a shelf lined with worn books, some about herbs, others about history. One lay open, its pages filled with sketches of wolves in various forms. Not monstrous, majestic, intelligent. She moved to the mantel. A wooden carving caught her eye. A wolf curled protectively around a human figure. The detail was exquisite, tender. She picked it up, tracing the grooves with her thumb. Ash had made this. She could feel it. Beside it sat a faded photograph. A woman with dark hair and sharp eyes, smiling beside Ash. Raven's breath caught. The hunter he'd loved. The one who betrayed him. She didn't look like a monster. She looked happy. Raven set the photo down gently, her thoughts swirling. What had happened between them? What had broken so badly that Ash chose exile over vengeance? She turned toward a small chest tucked beneath the window. It creaked open to reveal relics, letters, maps, and a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. She lifted it, and something inside her shifted. It was the symbol of her clan, but older, worn by time. Ash had once belonged to her world. Or maybe her world had once belonged to him. A journal lay beneath the pendant. She hesitated, then opened it. The handwriting was bold, uneven, Ash's voice on the page. She said love was stronger than blood. I believed her. I was wrong. She closed the journal, her chest tight. She understood now, the pain, the distance, the quiet fury in his eyes. He hadn't just been betrayed, he'd been rewritten, turned into the very thing her clan feared, because love had failed him. She sat by the window, the pendant still in her hand, and stared out at the forest. Ash had saved her, protected her, trusted her, and she was beginning to trust him. But trust was dangerous. It unraveled everything. It asked questions her clan had no answers for. Raven looked down at the pendant, then out at the trees. She wasn't sure who she was anymore, but she knew this. The truth was bigger than the code she'd been taught, and Ash was part of it.
The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the forest whispered through the trees, but inside, the silence was thick, waiting. Ash sat across from Raven, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on the flames. She hadn't asked, not directly, but something in her eyes had opened the door. "She was like you," he said. Sharp, quiet, always watching. Raven didn't interrupt. She let the silence stretch, let the words come at their own pace. "I met her during a raid," he said. "I was young, reckless, Thought I could outrun the hunters forever. But she didn't kill me. She hesitated, like you did. Raven's fingers tightened around the blanket. Her leg throbbed, but she barely noticed. We hid. For months, in places like this. She taught me how to read human maps. I taught her how to track by scent. We were something. Not quite peace, but close. His voice faltered. The fire popped. She said she'd leave the clan. Said love was stronger than blood. I believed her. Raven felt the ache in his words. Not just betrayal. Grief. One night, I woke up surrounded. Her clan had found us. She stood with them, didn't speak, didn't look at me. Raven swallowed hard. She turned you in? Ash nodded. They didn't kill me. They wanted to study me, break me, use me. He looked at her then, eyes dark and hollow. I escaped, barely, but I never went back. Not to her, not to anyone. Raven's heart pounded. She'd heard stories of werewolves who manipulated hunters, twisted their minds. But this was different. Ash hadn't hunted her. He'd saved her. And he'd been hunted himself. She betrayed you, Raven said quietly. Ash didn't answer. He didn't need to. The fire dimmed. The cabin felt smaller now, closer. Raven looked at him, not as a target, not as a threat, but as a man who had once believed in something bigger than war, and lost it. I don't know what I believe anymore, she admitted. Ash gave a faint smile. That's the first step. They sat in silence, two ghosts of their former lives, bound by wounds and questions. Outside, the wind shifted, and somewhere deep in the forest, something stirred.
The days blurred. Raven's leg healed faster than expected, but she stayed. Not because she couldn't leave, but because she hadn't decided to. Ash didn't ask her to stay. He didn't ask anything. He simply existed beside her, quiet and steady, like the forest itself. They spoke more now. Not much, but enough. He showed her how to read the wind, how it carried scent, how it warned of movement. She taught him how to set traps without leaving a trace. They'd trained together in the clearing behind the cabin. No weapons, just instinct. Raven was surprised by how easily they moved together, how naturally their rhythms aligned. One morning, she woke to find Ash carving something by the fire, a new wolf. Smaller, sleeker. Its eyes were closed, its body curled in sleep. For you, he said, placing it in her hand. Raven stared at it. The detail was delicate, protective, not violent. Why? She asked. Ash shrugged. You remind me of it. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. Later, they sat outside, watching the mist roll through the trees. Raven leaned against the cabin wall, her cloak wrapped tight around her shoulders. Ash sat beside her, close but not touching. I used to think silence was dangerous, she said. And now? Now I think it's honest. He nodded. The forest was quiet, not threatening, just still. Raven looked at him, really looked. The lines around his eyes, the way he watched the trees like they might speak, the way he never turned his back on the woods. You don't trust them, she said. The rogues? She nodded. I used to, before they lost themselves. Raven thought of her clan, of the way they spoke in absolutes, of the way they taught her to kill without question. Do you think I've lost myself? She asked. Ash didn't answer right away. No, he said. I think you're still searching. She looked down at the carving in her hand, the sleeping wolf, the quiet strength in its shape. I don't know what I'm becoming, she whispered. Ash's voice was low. Neither do I.
They sat in silence, the mist curling around them like breath. And in that silence, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. Enough to make Raven wonder if the bond between them was more than survival. Enough to make her question whether trust was a choice or a consequence.
The clearing behind the cabin was quiet, ringed by trees that stood like sentinels. Raven stepped into it slowly, her legs still stiff but strong enough to hold her weight. Ash waited near the edge, arms crossed, eyes scanning the horizon like he always did. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She drew her blade. Ash raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Raven nodded. "I need to move." He stepped forward, unarmed. "Then move." They began slowly, circling, testing. Raven lunged, feinted, pivoted. Ash dodged with ease, his movements fluid, almost graceful. He didn't strike, he didn't taunt. He simply responded, like water meeting stone. Raven pushed harder, her blade sliced through air, her feet kicking up dust. Ash blocked with his forearm, twisted and stepped aside. No aggression, no dominance, just rhythm. She paused, breath heavy, sweat beading at her brow. "You're holding back," she said. Ash shrugged. "You're healing. I don't need your pity." "It's not pity," he said. "It's respect." Raven blinked. The word hit harder than any blow. They resumed. This time Ash moved faster. He ducked beneath her strike, swept her leg, and caught her before she hit the ground. His hands were firm, steady. He helped her up without a word. Raven stared at him. "You fight like a hunter." "I was trained by one," he said. She didn't ask who. She already knew. They trained until the sun dipped low, casting gold across the clearing. Their movements grew sharper, more synchronized. Raven began to anticipate his steps. Ash began to mirror hers. It wasn't combat anymore. It was connection. Later, they sat on the cabin steps, muscles aching, silence stretching between them. "You're better than I expected," Raven said. Ash gave a faint smile. "You're faster than I expected." She looked at him, really looked at him. The way his shoulders relaxed, the way his eyes softened when he wasn't guarding them. "You don't hate me," she said. "No, I don't," he replied. "Even after everything?" His voice was quiet. "Hate is easy. I've done easy." It didn't help. Raven nodded slowly. She understood that more than she wanted to admit. The wind rustled through the trees. A bird called in the distance. The forest felt different now. Less like a battlefield, more like a witness. Raven leaned back, her blade resting across her knees. Ash glanced at her. "Do you trust me?" She didn't answer right away. "I'm learning to," she said. And that was enough, for now.
The rain came softly. It tapped against the cabin roof like a lullaby, steady and slow. Inside, the fire burned low, casting a warm glow across the wooden walls. Raven sat near the hearth, her cloak draped over her shoulders, her blade resting beside her. Ash sat across from her, sharpening a dagger with quiet focus. The rhythm of the stone against steel was soothing, familiar. They hadn't spoken much that day, but the silence between them had changed. It wasn't guarded anymore, it was shared. Raven watched him, her eyes tracing the curve of his jaw, the way his hands moved, precise, careful, like he was afraid of breaking something. "You still carry it," she said. Ash looked up. "What?" "The pain." He paused, then nodded. "Some things don't leave. They just settle." Raven leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "Do you ever wish you'd fought harder for her?" Ash's eyes darkened. "I did. She didn't." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Raven swallowed. "I don't know what I'd choose if it came to that." Ash set the dagger down. "You're already choosing." She looked at him, really looked.
The way he sat close but never too close. The way he never reached for her but always watched her like he might need to. "I don't know what this is," she whispered. Ash's voice was low. "Neither do I." The fire crackled, the rain softened. Raven stood slowly, walked to the window. Mist curled through the trees, silver and ghost-like. She felt him behind her, close, quiet, waiting. She turned. Their eyes met. No words, no movement, just breath. Ash reached up, slowly brushing a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered, warm, trembling. Raven didn't pull away. Her heart pounded. Her body stilled. He leaned in, just enough for her to feel the heat of him, just enough for her to wonder. But he stopped. So did she. They stood there, suspended in something fragile, something dangerous. Then, footsteps. Outside. Fast. Heavy. Ash stepped back instantly, eyes sharp, body tense. Raven grabbed her blade. The moment shattered, but it didn't vanish. It folded itself into the silence, tucked between the rain and the firelight. And as they prepared for whatever came next, Raven knew something had changed. Not loudly, not completely, but enough. Enough to make her wonder what might have happened if the world had waited just one more breath.
The forest was too quiet. Ash noticed it first. He stood at the edge of the clearing, eyes narrowed, body still. Raven joined him, her hand instinctively resting on the hilt of her blade. "No birds," he said. She listened. He was right. No rustling, no calls, just wind. Raven's pulse quickened. Ash turned toward the cabin. "Pack your things." She didn't argue. She moved quickly, gathering her gear, strapping her blades to her thighs. Her leg was strong now, her mind sharper, but her heart was heavy. Inside the cabin, Ash pulled a small device from beneath the floorboards, a tracker, burned out, old, but still pulsing faintly. "They found you," he said. She stared at it. "How?" Ash didn't answer. He didn't need to. She remembered the pendant, the one she'd taken from the chest, the one marked with her clan symbol. She'd worn it. Her breath caught. "I led them here?" Ash didn't flinch. They were always coming. Outside, the wind shifted. Footsteps, distant, measured. Raven moved to the window. Shadows flickered between the trees. Cloaks, blades. Her clan. She turned to Ash. "We have to run." He shook his head. "They'll track us. We hold here." Raven's voice was sharp. "You'll die." He met her gaze. "So will you." She hated how calm he was, how resigned. She paced the cabin, her thoughts racing. This was her fault. She'd let her guard down. She'd let him in. And now they'd both pay for it. Ash handed her a blade. Not hers, his. "Just in case," he said. Raven took it. The hilt was worn, familiar. It fit her hand like it belonged. Outside, the shadows grew closer. She looked at Ash. "They'll call me a traitor." He nodded. "Are you?" Raven didn't answer. She didn't know. The fire burned low. The cabin held its breath. And Raven stood between two worlds, one she was born into and one she'd begun to believe in. The first arrow struck the door. Ash didn't move. Raven raised her blade. The hunt had returned. But this time, she wasn't sure who she was hunting or who she was protecting.
The forest was no longer quiet. It pulsed with movement,
branches shifting, birds scattering, the wind carrying whispers that didn't belong. Raven stood at the edge of the clearing, her blade strapped tight, her breath steady but shallow. Ash was beside her, eyes scanning the tree line. His posture was tense, his jaw clenched. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. They both knew what was coming. Raven's clan had found her, and they weren't coming to talk. Ash turned toward the cabin. "We have until nightfall." Raven nodded. "They'll wait for darkness." "They always do." She moved quickly, helping him reinforce the cabin, barricading windows, setting traps along the perimeter, checking weapons. It felt surreal, preparing to fight the people who had raised her, trained her, named her Hunter. Inside, the fire burned low. The carved wolves on the shelf seemed to watch her, silent witnesses to the unraveling. Ash handed her a pouch of wolfsbane darts. "They'll come in waves, first to scare, then to kill." She took them. Her fingers trembled. "They'll want me alive, to make an example." Ash's voice was quiet. "They won't get you." She looked at him. "You don't owe me that." "I know." Outside, the wind shifted. The scent of iron and ash drifted through the trees. Raven's pulse quickened. She remembered the rituals, the chants, the way her clan prepared for war. Silent, efficient, merciless. She was one of them. Now she was something else. Ash moved to the door, checking the latch. "They'll come for me too." Raven stepped beside him. "Then we fight together." He looked at her, eyes steady and dark. "Sure?" "No," she said, "but I'm done running." The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the clearing. The forest held its breath. Raven stood at the window, watching the tree line. She saw them. Cloaked figures, blades glinting, eyes sharp. Her clan. Her past. Ash joined her, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his blade. "They'll call you traitor." "I know." "They'll try to break you." "I've already broken." The first arrow struck the cabin wall. Raven didn't flinch. She turned to Ash. "Whatever happens, don't hold back." Ash nodded. The second arrow hit the door. The hunt had begun. But this time, Raven wasn't the weapon. She was the choice.
The cabin burned, not with fire, but with fury. Raven's clan descended like shadows, cloaked in silence and precision. The traps she and Ash had laid slowed them, but didn't stop them. They knew her tactics. They'd taught her. Ash fought beside her, fast, brutal, relentless. But there were too many, and they weren't here for him. They were here for her. Raven's blade clashed against Kale's, her mentor, her judge. His eyes were cold, his strikes merciless. She blocked, pivoted, slashed, but he was stronger, sharper, fueled by betrayal. "You chose wrong," he growled. Raven didn't answer. She couldn't. Ash roared behind her, taking down 2 hunters before being tackled. She turned to help, but Kale struck her across the face, sending her sprawling. The world spun. Boots thundered around her. Hands grabbed her arms. Her blade was ripped away. She screamed, kicked, fought, but they held her down. Kale loomed above her, blood on his blade, fury in his voice. "You broke the code." Raven spat blood. "The code is broken." Kale's eyes narrowed. "You'll answer for this." Ash struggled against 3 hunters, his body bruised, his breath ragged. He locked eyes with Raven.
just for a moment. She saw it. Fear. Not for himself, for her. They dragged her away from him, through the trees, back toward the camp she once called home. Her wrists were bound, her cloak torn, her heart fractured. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The forest swallowed Ash's silhouette, and Raven was alone again, but not the same. Not anymore.
The camp hadn't changed. Same tents, same fire pits, same stone altar carved with the clan's creed. But Raven saw it differently now, like waking in a room she'd lived in her whole life, and realizing it was a cage. They dragged her through the center, wrists bound, blood crusted on her cheek. Hunters watched in silence, some with contempt, others with confusion. No one spoke her name. She was no longer one of them. Elder Cal stood at the altar, flanked by 2 sentinels. His cloak billowed in the wind, his eyes sharp as blades. "You'd broken the code," he said. Raven didn't flinch. "I survived. You consorted with the enemy. I was dying. You let him live." Raven's voice was steady. "He saved me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Cal raised his hand, silencing it. "You were trained to kill," he said, "not to feel." Raven stepped forward, chains clinking. "And what did that make me? A weapon? A ghost?" Cal's eyes narrowed. "It made you loyal." "To what?" she snapped. "To fear? To silence?" The sentinels moved closer. Cal didn't stop them. "You speak like a rogue," he said. "I speak like someone who's seen the truth." Cal descended the altar steps, stopping inches from her face. "Then speak it," he said. "Tell us what you saw." Raven's breath caught. She thought of Ash, his quiet strength, his pain, his kindness. She thought of the carving he gave her, the way he never asked her to change, only to choose. "I saw a man, not a monster." Cal's voice was ice. "Then you are blind." "No, I was blind before." The sentinels grabbed her arms. Cal turned to the crowd. "She has betrayed the hunt. She has broken the blood oath. She will be judged." Raven struggled, but the chains held. "You're afraid, not of me, of change." Cal didn't respond. He raised his blade. The crowd watched, and Raven stood there unbowed. Not a traitor, not a rogue, just a girl who had chosen to see.
Night fell hard. The clan's camp was cloaked in firelight and silence, its perimeter guarded by sentinels with blades drawn and eyes sharp. Raven sat inside the holding tent, wrists bound, her body aching, her thoughts louder than the wind. She'd stopped trying to reason with them. Words were wasted here. Her truth was poison to their creed. Outside, the forest stirred. Ash moved like smoke, low, fast, unseen. He'd studied their patterns, their blind spots. He knew how they thought. He used to think like them. Now he moved against them. He slipped past the outer guards, disabling traps with quiet precision. His cloak blended with the shadows, his breath steady. Every step was a risk, every heartbeat a countdown. Inside the tent, Raven sat upright. Something shifted in the air. A presence. Familiar. Then he was there. Ash stepped through the flap, eyes locked on hers. No words, just motion. He cut her bindings with the silver blade, his hands trembling. "You came?" she whispered. "I said I would." She stood, her legs weak but willing. Ash handed her a dagger, hers, cleaned, ready. Footsteps outside. Ash pulled her behind a stack of crates. 2 guards entered the tent. Raven held her breath. Ash didn't move. One stepped closer. Raven lunged. The fight was fast, brutal. Her blade struck true. Ash disarmed the second with a twist and a blow. Silence returned. They moved quickly, slipping through the camp like ghosts. Raven knew the terrain. Ash knew the mines. Together, they were unstoppable. But the alarm sounded. A horn split the night. Kale's voice roared through the camp. "She's loose!" Raven and Ash ran. Arrows flew, blades clashed, the forest lit with fire and fury. They reached the edge of the trees. Raven turned, saw Kale charging toward them, blade raised. Ash stepped between them. "No," Raven said. "He's mine." Kale struck. Raven blocked. Their blades sang through the air. Ash watched, ready, but didn't interfere. Raven fought with everything she had, not just skill, but conviction. She wasn't proving herself. She was reclaiming herself. Kale faltered. Raven disarmed him. She didn't kill him. She turned and ran. Ash followed. They vanished into the forest, breathless, bloodied, but alive. Behind them, the camp burned, not with fire, but with doubt. And Raven knew the hunt would never be the same.
The forest was alive with firelight and fury. Raven and Ash had escaped the camp, but not the hunt. Her clan pursued them through the trees, relentless, silent, deadly. The moon hung low, casting silver across the underbrush. Every breath was a countdown. They reached the ridge, high ground, defensible. Ash collapsed against a tree, blood soaking his side. Raven knelt beside him, pressing her hand to the wound. "You're losing too much," she said. Ash's voice was faint. "Keep going." "No," she snapped. "I'm done running." Footsteps approached. Fast. Familiar. Kale emerged from the trees, blade drawn, eyes burning. "You protect him, even now." Raven stood, her own blade raised. "He protected me. He's a monster. He's a man." Kale advanced. "You've lost yourself." "No," Raven said. "I've found something worth saving." The other hunters appeared behind him, forming a semicircle. Blades gleamed, bows drawn. Raven stood alone between them and Ash. Kale's voice was cold. "Step aside." "I won't." "You swore an oath." "I swore to protect the innocent." "He's not innocent." Raven's voice cracked. "Neither am I." Silence. The wind shifted. Raven lowered her blade, not in surrender, but in defiance. "You taught me to see threats, but you never taught me to see truth." Kale stepped forward. "You'll die for this." Raven didn't move. "Then I'll die knowing I chose something real." Ash stirred behind her, trying to rise. She turned, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Stay down," she whispered. "I've got this." Kale raised his blade. Raven raised hers. But before the clash, a voice rang out from the trees. "Enough!" A younger hunter stepped forward, her eyes uncertain, her blade lowered. She saved him, and he saved her. Kale turned. "You question the code?" "I question the cost." Others hesitated. A ripple of doubt, a fracture. Raven saw it, felt it. She stepped forward, blade still raised. "I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking you to choose." Kale's grip tightened, his eyes burned. But he didn't strike. He turned and walked away.
The hunters followed, some with hesitation, some with anger, some with something new in their eyes. Raven dropped her blade. Ash looked up at her, bloodied, breathless. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," she replied. "I did." The forest exhaled, and Raven stood in the clearing, no longer a hunter, no longer a weapon, just a woman who had chosen to see.
The forest was quiet again. Not the silence of threat, but the silence that follows a storm. Raven moved slowly through the underbrush, her cloak torn, her blade heavy at her side. Ash limped beside her, his wound wrapped in cloth, his breath shallow. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Behind them, the camp faded into shadow. The clan had fractured. Some retreated, some watched in silence, and some hesitated, but none followed. They had escaped, but Raven didn't feel free. They reached a small glade, moonlight spilling across the moss like silver. Ash collapsed against a fallen tree, his eyes closed, his body trembling. Raven knelt beside him, her hands stained with blood, his, hers, theirs. "You need rest," she said. Ash nodded, but didn't move. Raven looked around. The trees felt different now. Not like home, not like danger, just unfamiliar. She sat beside him, her back against the bark, her thoughts unraveling. She had stood against her clan. She had defended a werewolf. She had broken the code. And now she didn't know who she was. Ash opened his eyes, looked at her. "You did what they couldn't." Raven's voice was hollow. "I don't know if it was right. It was brave." She shook her head. "I feel empty." Ash reached into his satchel, pulled out the carving, the sleeping wolf he'd made for her. He placed it in her hand. "You're not empty," he said. "You're changing." Raven stared at the carving, the detail, the care, the quiet strength. She felt the tears before she realized they were falling. She hadn't cried in years. Not when she was branded, not when she was blooded, not when she was sent into the forest alone. But now, in the quiet, with Ash beside her and the world behind her, she broke. Ash didn't speak. He didn't move. He just let her fall apart. And in that unraveling, something new began. Not loudly, not clearly, but enough. Enough to make Raven wonder if the pain was the price of becoming. Enough to make her believe that survival wasn't the end, it was the beginning.
The forest was no longer a hiding place. It was a battleground waiting to be claimed. Raven moved through the trees with purpose, her cloak trailing behind her, her blade strapped tight. Ash walked beside her, slower now, his wound healing but still raw. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. They had a mission. The rogues were scattered, fractured by fear, hardened by exile, but not all had lost themselves. Some remembered what it meant to protect. Some still believed in something more than bloodlust. Raven found them first. A pair of wolves camped near the river bend. One growled when she approached. The other stepped forward, eyes wary. "You're the hunter," he said. "I was. Now I'm something else." Ash stood behind her, silent but present. "We're building something. A defense. A choice." The wolves exchanged glances. "You want us to fight?" "I want you to stand, with us, not for war, for survival." They agreed. Word spread. By dusk, more had arrived. Rogues, outcasts, even a few hunters who had seen the raid and questioned the code.
One was the girl who had spoken up in the camp. Her blade was sharp, her eyes sharper. "I saw you stand," she said to Raven. "Now I'll stand with you." They gathered in a clearing lit by torches and moonlight. Raven stood at the center, Ash beside her, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. "This isn't about revenge. It's about truth." She looked at the wolves. "You're not monsters." She looked at the hunters. "You're not blind." She looked at Ash, "And I'm not who I was." The wind stirred. "We fight tomorrow, not to destroy, to defend." Ash stepped forward. "They'll come with fire, with fury, with fear." Raven's voice was steady. "Then we meet them with something stronger." Silence. Then a howl. Low, steady, joined by others. Not a war cry, a promise. Raven closed her eyes.
The clearing was no longer neutral ground. It was a line drawn in fire. Raven stood at its center, her cloak torn, her blade strapped tight. Ash was beside her, his wound bound, his eyes sharp. Around them, the allies they'd gathered, rogue wolves, outcast hunters, those who had chosen truth over tradition, formed a loose circle of defiance. Across the field, the clan arrived. Kale led them, flanked by sentinels, his face carved from stone. Behind him, rows of hunters, uniformed, armed, unwavering. They moved like a single breath, trained to strike without hesitation. Raven stepped forward. "You came," she said. Kale's voice was cold. "To restore order. This is order. Choice, truth, balance." Kale raised his blade. "You've corrupted the hunt. I've revealed it." Ash stepped forward. "You taught her to kill. She chose to protect." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some hunters shifted, some rogues growled low. The tension was thick, not yet violence, but close. Kael's eyes swept the gathering. "You stand with wolves?" "I stand with those who saved me. You were ours. I was never yours. I was a weapon. Now I'm a voice." Kael raised his hand. The sentinels stepped forward. But so did Raven's allies. Blades were drawn, bows raised, wolves crouched low, ready to strike. Raven didn't move. "This doesn't have to end in blood," she said. Kael's voice was ice. "It already has." The wind shifted. A single hunter stepped forward from Kael's ranks, young, hesitant. "She speaks truth," the girl said. "I saw it. I felt it." Kael turned. "You questioned the code?" "I questioned the cost." More hunters hesitated. Some lowered their weapons. Others didn't. Raven saw it, the fracture, the possibility. But Kael wasn't finished. He stepped forward, blade gleaming. "If you believe in this," he said to Raven, "then face me." Raven nodded. "I will." The crowd parted. The duel was coming, not for dominance, for definition.
The clearing emptied, not of people, but of noise. Raven stepped forward, her blade gleaming, her cloak torn, her breath steady. Across from her, Kael waited, her mentor, her judge, her shadow. His eyes were cold, his stance perfect. He had trained her for this moment, but not like this. The crowd formed a ring around them, hunters, rogues, allies. No one spoke, no one moved. This wasn't a battle. It was a reckoning. Kyle raised his blade. You were mine. Raven didn't flinch. I was never yours. You carry my mark. I carry my choice. Kyle lunged. Raven met him. Their blades clashed with fury, metal singing, sparks flying. Every strike was memory, every dodge defiance. Kyle fought like a storm. Raven fought like a fire. She knew his rhythm, he knew her instincts. They were mirrors, broken, burning. Kyle swept low. Raven jumped. He feinted left. She spun right. Blood bloomed across her arm, but she didn't falter. You betrayed the hunt, he snarled. I became more than it, she spat. He struck again, faster, harder. She blocked, twisted, countered. Her blade sliced across his ribs. He staggered, growled, charged. They crashed to the ground. Raven rolled, came up fast, blade raised. Kyle struck her shoulder. She screamed, but held her ground. You are weak, he roared. I'm free, she said. She feinted, twisted, disarmed him. Kyle fell to his knees, breath ragged, blood dripping. Raven stood over him, blade poised. The crowd held its breath. Kyle looked up. Do it. Raven hesitated, then lowered her blade. I'm not your weapon anymore. Kyle stared at her, confused, broken, silent. Raven turned to the crowd. This is the end of obedience and the beginning of truth. Ash stepped forward, his eyes locked on hers. The rogues howled, the hunters bowed their heads, and Raven stood in the clearing, not as a soldier, but as a leader.
The duel was over. Kaal lay defeated, breath shallow, blade discarded. Raven stood above him, not as a victor, but as a woman who had chosen a different path. Around her the crowd was silent. The hunt had cracked. But not everyone had surrendered. A rogue hunter, hidden in the trees, raised a bow. Raven didn't see him. Ash did. He moved without thought. The arrow flew. Ash shoved Raven aside. It struck him in the ribs. Raven turned at the sound, a gasp, a stumble, a collapse. Ash was on the ground, blood blooming across his side, breath shallow. No, she whispered, dropping beside him. No, no, no! Her hands pressed against the wound, frantic. Her cloak became a bandage, her voice a prayer. You're okay, she said. You're okay. Ash's eyes fluttered open. He smiled, weak, crooked, familiar. You're safe, he said. You weren't supposed to save me again, she whispered. Ash coughed. Pain etched across his face. Habit. The crowd shifted. The hunter who fired the arrow was already gone, fled into the trees, faceless, forgotten. But the damage remained. Raven looked around. Help me! She shouted. He needs help! The young hunter, the girl who had spoken up, rushed forward with herbs and cloth. A rogue wolf knelt beside Ash, pressing a paw to his chest, whispering something ancient. Raven didn't move. She stayed with him. Her hands stained, her breath shaking. Ash looked up at her, eyes dimming. You changed everything, he said. Raven leaned close, her forehead against his. So did you. The forest stilled. The battle was ending. But Raven knew this wasn't just survival anymore. This was love. And love had a cost.
The fire crackled in the center of the clearing. Ash lay nearby, his wound bound, his breath steady but shallow. Raven knelt beside him, her cloak soaked in blood and rain, her blade resting across her knees. Around her, the crowd had gathered. Hunters, rogues, allies. Some stood in silence, others whispered. All watched. Kal-El sat against a tree, defeated but alive. His eyes burned with something Raven couldn't name. Loss, maybe, or recognition. Raven rose slowly. She walked to the center of the clearing, where the clan's altar had been dragged from the camp, a slab of stone etched with the Kreen's hunt's creed. The place where oaths were sworn, where blood was offered. She stood before it. Her voice rang out, clear and steady. I was born into the hunt. Murmurs rippled. I was trained to obey, to kill, to never question. She drew her blade. I swore a blood oath to serve the clan, to protect its code. She raised the blade to her palm. But that code is broken. She sliced her hand, clean, deliberate. Blood dripped onto the stone. I break my oath. Gasps. Silence. I break it not in shame, but in truth. She turned to the crowd. I choose something older than the hunt, something stronger. Her eyes found ash. I choose love. She stepped back from the altar. The blood pooled. The stone did not respond. But the people did. The young hunter stepped forward, her blade lowered. I break mine too. A rogue wolf howled. Another hunter dropped his weapon. One by one, they stepped forward, some in silence, some in tears, not all, but enough. Kal-El watched, unmoving. Raven returned to Ash's side, knelt beside him, and took his hand. You're not alone anymore, she whispered. Ash smiled, faint but real, and Raven knew this was more than rebellion. It was rebirth.
The clearing held its breath. Raven's blood oath lay broken on the altar stone, her voice still echoing in the minds of those who had watched her choose love over legacy. Ash lay nearby, wounded but alive, his hand in hers. Around them, the crowd shifted, not with rage, but with reckoning. Kale remained seated against the tree, silent, defeated. His blade lay untouched, his authority undone. The young hunter stepped forward again, her voice steady. The hunt is broken. Another hunter dropped his blade. It was never whole. A rogue wolf growled low, not in threat, but in agreement. Then the fracture began. Some hunters turned and walked into the forest, cloaks trailing behind them, eyes unreadable, not fleeing, not surrendering, just leaving. The code no longer held them. Others knelt before Raven, before Ash, before the truth they had witnessed. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Kale remained seated, silent, defeated. His blade lay untouched, his authority undone. The young hunter stepped forward again, her voice steady. The hunt is broken. Another hunter dropped his blade. It was never whole. A rogue wolf growled low, not in threat, but in agreement. Then the fracture began. Some hunters turned and walked into the forest, cloaks trailing behind them, eyes unreadable, not fleeing, not surrendering, just leaving. The code no longer held them. Others knelt before Raven, before Ash, before the truth they had witnessed. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Cale stood slowly, his face pale, his voice hollow. "You've undone everything." Raven met his gaze. "No, I've revealed it." He looked at the crowd, at the hunters who had once followed him, now scattered, uncertain. Then he turned and vanished into the trees. No one followed. The clearing was quiet again, not with fear, with possibility. Raven knelt beside Ash, brushing a hand across his brow. He stirred, eyes fluttering open. "It's done," she whispered. Ash smiled faintly. "Not done, just different." She looked around, the broken altar, the scattered weapons, the faces watching her not as a soldier, but as something else. A leader, a bridge, a beginning. The hunt had fractured, but something new was forming in its place, and Raven was ready to shape it.
The forest was quiet, not with tension, not with aftermath, with stillness. Raven walked slowly through the trees, her cloak dragging across damp earth. Ash limped beside her, his wound healing, his breath steady. Behind them, the clearing lay empty. No torches, no weapons, no war. Just silence. They reached the edge of a ravine where the ground dipped into shadow and moss. Raven carried something wrapped in cloth. Ash held a spade carved from bone and wood. They didn't speak. This wasn't a conversation. It was a ritual. Raven knelt and unwrapped the cloth. Inside lay her clan's crest, etched in silver, worn by time, the symbol of the hunt. The mark she'd once carried with pride. Ash began to dig. The earth gave way easily, as if it too was ready to let go. Raven placed the crest into the hollow, then her blade, then the carving, the sleeping wolf Ash had given her, now cracked at the edge. Ash paused. "You're sure?" he asked. Raven nodded. "I need to bury who I was." Ash didn't argue. He covered the grave slowly, carefully. When it was done, Raven placed a stone atop it, flat, smooth, marked with a single line. Not a name. A beginning. She stood, breath catching. "I thought I'd feel lighter." Ash looked at her. "You will, but not yet."
The clearing had changed. No longer a battlefield, no longer a place of judgment. Now it was a meeting ground. Raven stood at the center, her cloak repaired, her blade sheathed. Ash sat beside her, his wound healing, his eyes clear. Around them, wolves and hunters gathered, not in formation, but in curiosity. Some stood apart, arms crossed, eyes wary. Others stepped closer. Raven raised her voice, not loud, but steady. "We were taught to fear each other." A murmur rippled. "We were taught that wolves were monsters, that hunters were executioners." She looked at Ash. "But fear is a story, and stories can change." Ash stood slowly, his voice low but firm. "I've seen hunters kill without mercy. I've seen wolves lose themselves. But I've also seen kindness, courage, choice." He looked at the crowd. "We can build something better." A rogue wolf stepped forward. "What does that look like?" Raven smiled faintly. "It looks like this." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a new crest, half fang, half arrow. A symbol carved into wood, rough but clear. "No more blood oaths," she said. "No more blind hunts.
The young hunter stepped forward. "What do we swear to?" Raven met her gaze. "To protect, to question, to choose." The wolf nodded. "And if we disagree?" Ash answered. "Then we speak, not strike." Silence. Then, one by one, wolves and hunters stepped forward, placing tokens at the base of the new crest: a blade, a claw, a feather, a stone. Not as offerings, as promises. Raven watched, her heart heavy but hopeful. This wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was the beginning. And beginnings were enough.
The wind carried her voice. Raven stood atop the ridge overlooking the valley, once a battleground, now quiet. Ash sat nearby, wrapped in a cloak, his wound healing, his eyes on her. Below, wolves and hunters moved together, rebuilding shelters, tending wounds, sharing food. It was fragile, but it was real. Raven held a scroll in her hand, sealed with the new crest, half fang, half arrow, a symbol of unity, of defiance, of choice. She turned to the messenger, a young hunter with steady eyes and a swift stride. "Take this to the clans," Raven said. "All of them." The girl nodded. "What does it say?" Raven looked out over the valley. "It says the war is over." She handed it over. "It says, we've chosen something better." The girl tucked it into her satchel and vanished into the trees. Raven stood in silence. Ash joined her, his hand brushing hers. "They'll resist." "I know." "They'll call you traitor." "They already have." Ash smiled. "And if they don't listen?" Raven's voice was quiet. "Then we keep building, until they can't ignore us."
The fire crackled softly. Ash lay on a bed of moss and woven cloth, his wound healing, his breath steady. Raven sat beside him, her cloak wrapped around her shoulders, her blade resting nearby, but untouched. The forest was still, not with tension, with peace. Above them, stars blinked through the canopy. The moon hung low, casting silver across their skin. Wolves slept nearby. Hunters whispered quietly around distant fires. No one watched them now. They were alone, together. Ash opened his eyes, slow and calm. "You're still here." Raven smiled. "I'm not going anywhere." He reached for her hand. She let him. They sat in silence for a long time. No words, no movement, just breath. Raven looked at him, really looked at him. The lines around his eyes, the way his chest rose and fell. The way he didn't guard himself anymore. "I used to think peace was weakness," she said. Ash's voice was low. "It's the hardest thing." She nodded. "I don't know what comes next." "You don't have to." Raven leaned back, her head resting against his shoulder. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He just stayed. The fire dimmed. The wind stirred. Raven closed her eyes. She didn't dream of blood, or blades, or betrayal. She dreamed of quiet, of moss and moonlight, of a hand in hers. And for the first time, she didn't wake in fear. She woke in peace.
The valley was quiet. Wolves and hunters worked side by side, rebuilding shelters, planting roots, sharing stories. Children laughed. Fires burned low. The air was thick with something rare. Hope. Raven stood on the ridge, watching it all unfold. Ash leaned against a tree nearby, his wound healing, his eyes soft. They hadn't spoken much that day. They didn't need to. Peace didn't require words. But the wind shifted. A scent. Faint. Wrong. Raven turned toward the horizon. The trees beyond the valley swayed unnaturally. Birds scattered. The sky dimmed, not with storm, but with something colder. Ash stepped beside her. "You feel that?" She nodded. "It's not the hunt." "No, it's older." Raven narrowed her eyes. A figure moved in the distance, too far to see clearly. Cloaked, watching, then gone. She didn't speak. She didn't chase. She simply stood there, the wind brushing past her like a warning. Ash placed a hand on her shoulder. "We just built this." Raven's voice was quiet. "Then we protected." They turned back toward the valley. The fire still burned, the people still laughed. But Raven knew. The world didn't end when the hunt fractured. It began, and somewhere beyond the trees, something waited, not for war, but for opportunity.
The sun was rising. Soft gold spilled across the valley, brushing the treetops, warming the moss, casting long shadows that stretched like memory. The fires had burned low, the wounds had begun to heal. The war was over, but the world was still wide. Raven stood at the edge of the forest, her cloak fluttering in the breeze, her blade sheathed, her eyes on the horizon. Ash joined her, his steps slow but steady, his breath calm. He carried no weapon, just a satchel, just hope. Behind them, the alliance stirred, wolves and hunters working side by side, rebuilding what had been broken. Children laughed, elders whispered. The old ways were fading, the new ones were being written. Raven didn't speak. She didn't need to. Ash reached for her hand. She took it. They stepped forward, past the ridge, past the clearing, past the graves and the altars and the blood, into the trees, into the mist, into the unknown. Not as fugitives, not as enemies, as something new. The forest welcomed them, not with silence, but with breath. Birds called, leaves rustled. The wind carried stories waiting to be told. Raven glanced at Ash. He smiled. She smiled back, and together they walked into the future, not knowing what waited, but knowing they'd face it side by side.